back when I was first meeting you, Joe, that when we first started talking in 2012, that is when I made the transition from not knowing anything about sales and marketing to being good at it. And the only difference that between the two was that I made a daily effort of how can I help somebody else with a referral, or here's some information that you need. That switch made all the difference in the world because now people viewed me as, oh, he's somebody that can help me. And that alone makes the difference for people that aren't good at sales and marketing. All you have to do is reframe your thought pattern to say, my goal here isn't sales and marketing, my goal here is to help somebody, and make a conscious effort to give people referrals and give people information, and put somebody in touch when I think it would be helpful, not just for the sake of promoting myself. And that made all the difference. And it was very fortuitous that I met you and that was your philosophy at the same time.
Our friendship has been fruitful for us both. I enjoy you very much. Michelle Lott sent me a note yesterday asking if I knew this person and I didn't, and he's overseas, and he sent her a lead and said something like, you are the best RIQA person in America. And I wrote her back and I said, I guess he doesn't know Rob Packard.
Oh,
Um,
that's mean.
and I immediately, like, I waited like 2 seconds and then I wrote all caps, only kidding, only kidding. And she wrote back and said, um, well, he must think I'm cuter.
Oh, definitely.
And I
I'm never going
said,
to get a beauty contest win.
I said, I said, but Rob does have a rugged teddy bear like quality. So,
Yes. Yes. So
so it really depends. I mean,
for a
some
certain subset of the population, I would be more attractive, but I think those might be 500-pound men.
ladies and gentlemen, Rob Packard. I mean, what? Teach us something, Robert,
Okay. I have some slides. Can I share those?
please.
Okay.
For
So
those
this
of
is
you
what I
joining late, by the way, what's over his left shoulder is his bike
yes.
contraption that is not exactly stationary, but he is on it all the time.
Yeah, for those of you that are cyclists, it's an erg trainer, so it automatically adjusts the ergs or watt outputs. For those of for those of you that are not cyclists, it's a really expensive video game,
And it's not a
and it gets me in
Peloton.
shape. But it actually has quick releases, so I can put on the wheels and head outside. It's a gravel bike I built myself. I designed and built it, and you find out when you're 6'6" and 300 pounds that every single component on the bike has to be overbuilt, overspec'd, and custom, and including the seat. I never realized that seat had, even though it's made out of titanium, might not be enough. So it's definitely been an adventure on every single aspect of it. I had to learn so
I
much
have to
about
have you
engineering.
back for a webinar on what it's like to be 6'6" and 300 pounds. I think there's an hour's worth of content there easily.
There clearly is, and I could start a whole new web channel just on that.
I bet you
Some people
could.
have.
And there would be some nice traction, but I'm sure the friends at home are now clamoring. What is this? Top 10 obstacles to MDR.
Yeah, so I was just trying to think of a quick, easy way to organize my thoughts for today. But anybody that wants to interrupt and ask a question about implementation of the MDR, questions are always better because they're real versus something that I thought up of in advance that I think is important
We'll
versus
have no
what the customer
difficulty
wants.
generating questions today, I'm confident.
But I was thinking of the late night talk show hosts that say, this is our top 10,
Mhm.
which this is what I came up with. And I saved the ones at the end for the end, not because they're lowest in importance, because translations we did last week with
Mhm.
Michelle. And so I put a link in there for hers. And Udemed's been done before by Richard Houlihan.
Richard.
So
Mhm.
his is in there as well. So I tried to leave those towards the end. So if people want those, we can just quickly show the slide.
Okay.
But number one, the deadlines and extensions. So I have clients that have decided that they want to debate for an extended period of time what the interpretations of deadlines are. So we have an obvious deadline of May 26, 2021. So that's when the MDR comes into enforcement. But there are a whole bunch of other deadlines after that as well. And the most important one is, if you have a CE certificate already, when does it expire? And I can't tell you the last time I actually spoke to a client when they actually knew that answer, which is scary. You should know when your certificates expire, and you should be planning your regulatory strategy and update of documentation according to when is your next audit and when do your certificates expire. And if you don't know that information, that's something that you should probably put really high up on the list. I mean, it's not more important than your anniversary or your children's birthdays, but it's probably third down the list. It's certainly just as important as tax time. So those are some things that you should be thinking about. Uh, the latest conversation seems to be along the lines of, we have all this inventory, we're not yet in possession of everything that we need for the MDR. Can we keep on selling our product? And so it depends is always the answer for every regulatory expert out there. But if your product has an existing CE certificate, and you need to make sure you understand the difference between a CE certificate and a quality system certificate, they're not the same. But if you have a CE certificate for a class 2A device, a class 1 measurement device, a class 1 sterile device, a device that's class 2B or class 3, those devices, if you have an existing certificate, you can continue to sell those products until the expiration of your certificate, or one of the later transition deadlines, which I believe is 2024, but it may have been bumped to 2025. But the key is only if you don't make any changes. So if you have an electronic device with electrical components that expire all the time, or they run out of stock, you may find that make no changes requirement being very difficult to comply with, because you just may run out of raw materials to build your product.
Mhm.
Also, any device that has software in it, we all know that we get updates all the time from every single operating system. Well, software for medical devices, that has to be updated too, to keep pace with those operating systems and the hardware that we run it on, because everybody wants their band-aid to tell them when they need to change it on their notification on their phone. So if you're going to update your software, that's a change. So yes, you can continue to sell it with your existing CE certificate, but not if you're going to make changes to the device, which completely negates the whole concept of you can continue to sell it. You're going to have to transition over the MDR. You can stockpile a ton of stuff, but who has the money to stockpile a bunch of old product when we're coming out with new products all the time?
Ask in that vein, so dumbing it down for my level, I have an iPhone 10. Let's say my virtual stethoscope works on the iPhone 10, and then there's an iOS revision, and the iPhone 12, it no longer works. I can
Yeah,
continue to sell on the 10, but if I were to make an adaptation so that it was compatible with 12, I would have to put in a change, and that would not be covered.
correct. And
So you're
and of course,
subject to the platforms you're on. Any of their changes are
yeah,
on you as
and
well.
they're gonna potentially force you into making a corrective action to your software to resolve bugs, or to completely re-engineer your software to comply with the new operating system.
Mhm.
Sometimes you get lucky and you don't have to make a change, but um, that's the that's not the norm. The norm is you have to make some sort of tweak to your software to comply with the new operating system or comply with the new hardware, or both.
But
And
if your
we're
device
always
is still
finding
class one, you have,
cybersecurity bugs that we have to address too.
fair enough. What if your device is still class one?
So if your device is still class 1, so it's not a reusable surgical device, it's not measuring, it's not sterile, a lot of people are under the impression, well, oh, I can keep on selling it indefinitely. And that's a misunderstood interpretation. The correct interpretation is, if you have already shipped it to your distributor in Europe, yes, they can sell it. So you can if you know there's going to be a gap of so many months before you're compliant with the MDR, you should really be shipping the product to your distributor and getting that first transaction done, So it's already in the EU. Once it's in the EU, they can continue to use it up until a certain date. But you cannot continue to ship things to your distributor and do business as usual if you're not compliant.
I could see it being motivating for a manufacturer to stuff inventory, but that's not the distributor's typical motivation, other than being informed about something they likely don't know a lot about,
Mhm.
and explain to them, look, if you want to continue to sell my product, oh yes, I do. It's a good mover. You better buy it now because I have, you know.
Yeah, but what I'm seeing more of is companies are hearing distributors and customers scream that we need your product and you're running out. And so I'm not finding a whole bunch of clients that want to stockpile stuff or even able to stockpile things. I'm finding more the norm seems to be companies that are running out of material that is compliant with the MDD that they could ship to their distributor, and they're worried about a gap. And but in theory, you could stockpile a whole bunch of stuff. But what companies are trying to do is interpret the regulations as it, I can keep on, if I bought the inventory here and I have it in my facility, I can keep on shipping it to my distributor because it's all under the MDD, and I can keep on doing that until 2025, and that's
Mhm.
not the case.
Okay, moving on.
So this one I kept real short for the products on the market because this is an extension of what we were just talking about. If you've already sold the product, this is the date that you can no longer do that. So it has to be that through that first transaction, not something that's still in your warehouse. So that's an
Theoretically,
important detail.
then, theoretically, if my distributor is holding something I sold them today
Mhm.
in June of 2025, it must be destroyed,
Relabeled.
relabeled.
Yeah, so you can't. So if the product, if there are certain changes to it that require relabeling, you'd have to relabel it. There might not be any changes to it, but your declaration of conformity and other documentation should now reflect the MDR.
Okay.
But one of the simplest ways that people are going to be able to tell, is this under the new MDR or is this under the MDD, is the importer sticker. So one of the things that we have to do under the MDR is add an importer sticker. So for companies that are already in Europe, this isn't really an issue because they don't have to have an importer. But for companies that are shipping from the US or India or Asia to the EU, they're going to have an importer, and the importer's supposed to have their label on the product as well. And it doesn't have to be physically on the device. So if you have a sterile product, they're not going to open up your sterile packaging, but it's going to be on the outside next to your other label. And if the product doesn't have that importer sticker, people are going to know that, hey, this isn't compliant with the MDR. They may not be trained to that yet, but they will be soon. And that'll be one way easily to tell, this was already shipped in before we had importer stickers applied. So this one is MDD. And if it's still sticking around in 2025, hopefully um, there isn't too much inventory that old. Um, the next thing I had here was reclassification. So this is something everybody was worried about a while back because they wanted to know, hey, are we going to have, uh, is our device going to be reclassified or not, and what classification will it be? And spinal implants was a big deal because a lot of the spinal implants were talking about going from class 2B to class 3, and that changed the requirements significantly. Another big one that was changing was the reusable surgical devices. So I've had a number of companies come to me and say, well, ours is a reusable device. I'd be like, yes, but it's not a surgical device. So that's one of the key differences. If you have a reusable device like a thermometer, that's a reusable device, but it's not a surgical device. So it's not going to get exposed to blood and doesn't have to be disinfected and re-sterilized. So that's what that specific regulation had to do with, was things like scalpels and forceps and things that are used in surgery. How are they being properly disinfected and sterilized, and how many times is that being done for? And so that's what that particular reclassification was all about. And that's actually causing a lot of trouble for these companies that made them all along. They're class ones, they don't have a technical file. Now they have to submit things to a notified body, and they can't get the notified body to give them a CE certificate before the MDR takes effect. So there's a lot of class one devices that are reusable surgical devices dealing with this issue. The software as a medical device, most of the software as a medical device was a class 1 that didn't require a notified body. Some of those are changing due to the guidance documents. They're clarifying what things are going to be a class 2A or a class 2B or a class 3, what things are going to require notified body involvement, which things are not. And so just the guidance documents on software as a medical device is something that a lot of companies have to pay very close attention to. And then the cosmetic use, uh, there were like contact lenses that are used to change your eye color. That's not a medical purpose, but they wanted to regulate those rather than have them fly under the radar continuously. So now those are going to be regulated under the MDR. So there's a whole lot of companies that didn't work with notified bodies before that are now having to work with notified bodies, and that's really putting a bigger burden on the small number of companies out there that can help you.
Rains, you had a comment?
Yeah, jumped in a little slow there. So it was actually on the previous slide in terms of, yeah, products. I already see Mark. So I was trying to make sense in my mind in terms of those dates specifically. As I understood you, it was if it is in the EU at your distributor, that product is good to continue to be sold, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so it's not the product is on the boat, the product has a manufacturing date prior to May 26. It has to be physically at the distributor in the EU received, and then it can continue to be sold after May 26.
That's the official interpretation. Realistically, if you've got a purchase order and you've already shipped and it's on a boat, are the European authorities going to turn stuff away that suddenly arrived on the day after the transition date? I doubt it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they'll know. I'm not sure they'll know what to look for.
Yeah.
But in theory, that is a possible outcome. So you got 30 days. If you're planning on shipping something to your distributor, you might want to make sure it gets there on time because
Okay.
that
Yeah.
could get expensive. If our plan is to ship the next 5 years worth of product off to our distributor, or 4 years, and we're going to ship it before the 26th of this month or next month, and you miss it by a day and they refuse all of that, I suppose it's a possible outcome that I don't want to find out what happens.
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to differentiate manufacturing date from date received in the EU. So, all right, appreciate that.
Yeah, but I suspect that the date of shipment, most companies do freight on board Incoterms, so it's no longer my problem once it leaves my dock. It's now your problem, and you need to get your own insurance and everything. So my suspicion is the day it leaves your dock is what matters, and that's in your declaration of conformity should predate that. So I have a feeling if you were to litigate it, it would probably the day it leaves your dock, it's no longer owned by me, it's owned by you.
Okay.
But if you really want to get in that level of detail, I can tell you who should be on this call. It would be Eric Volbrick because he's the lawyer.
Ginger,
He also gets twice as much money per hour.
Let me redirect to Ginger. You want to put on your camera? I know you had a comment to share. Ask to unmute. I'm asking. All right. Well, in the meanwhile, I'll read. Oh, here she comes.
And then, yeah, I don't get on very often.
I don't see you though.
Yeah, I'm working on multiple, trying to figure out where my camera, there we go. I'm working on multiple computers because my old one's just about to die. And so it's always a challenge to see where I'm working. So I'm unmuted, I'm on video.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to see
Oh,
you.
you've never met?
No, we've just traded emails in the past. So, yeah, I'm on my old laptop because it has Zoom. The new one does not. Anyway, neither here nor there. What I would like you to readdress is the importer sticker. I think this is people making up the best practice might be to have an importer sticker on your package. There's no requirement in the regulation, to my understanding, that importer has to be identified on the device package. It's that the importer has to be identified somehow. Accompanying documents, bill of lading, making sure it gets through to the distributor end user is the issue. However you want to do that, but saying it has to be a sticker, I think is a misnomer. And so maybe you can speak to that a little bit more.
What I would do is I would go back to the section of the MDR
Mm-hmm,
that's specific to that. And
exactly.
so we want,
I think it says it has to be identified through the supply chain, but that does not mean a sticker on the box. Just as you said, not a sticker on the immediate sterile package container either.
so, um,
There's just been a lot of discussion in the RAPS forum on this,
so importers shall indicate on the device or its packaging or in document
or in
accompanying the device.
documents, or in
So,
documents accompanying the device. So to say it has to be a sticker on the package is a
yep.
misnomer.
Yeah. So then in the next sentence it says they shall ensure the additional label does not obscure any information on the label provided by the manufacturer. So
Assuming you put it on your box or package, right?
yes, and I think this is one where we may see some guidance in the future.
Mm-hmm.
They write the regulations so they're fairly broad. I
Yeah.
think the intent for allowing it to be put on other documentation um, would be in a case where you have something that isn't physical. So if you have software as a medical device, or you have something that where it's just not feasible to physically put it on the product
Right. Right.
or the product label, that would be appropriate. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the point of the regulation is to have the importer identified so they have someone that
Correct.
they can identify that's responsible for all these things in this article.
Correct.
Um, so
I
yeah,
don't.
it's an
I,
area where it's not clear that what would be okay and what would not be okay.
No, I agree. I just wanted to bring that point back up to people who aren't familiar with
Yep.
stickering, because I can tell you, having done things in China where it better come in with Chinese labeling on it. You can't bring it into China and have a China label or do it in China.
No, correct.
Right. So
Yeah,
just be sure that
and
everyone's clear. You can think of innovative ways to do it, but a sticker doesn't have to be the only way.
yeah, and we don't know whether we're going to have a company that is going to be the distributor and authorized rep and importer all in one, or it's
Hmm.
going to be three different entities or two different entities.
Right.
But it's part of the regulation that companies never had before.
Right.
And I have clients that don't have an importer identified,
Right.
don't have any kind of agreement with them, but they clearly um, haven't thought about how they're going to address this.
No, and I
And
have clients like that too. I just want to make sure that
yeah,
they need to
people,
think through it and not think
yep,
that it has to be a sticker right on the package.
yep, that's a good catch on
Sorry.
the wording there. No,
I just want to be sure, because it's like having a notified body say you have to do something based on the ISO standards. Like, that's not what the standard says.
yeah,
So I push back on things like that.
yep,
Thanks, Ginger.
Thank you. Thank you for
Mhm.
letting me, I'm sorry, vent. I've seen
no,
so much
no, it's good for people to see
expectations
where
come
this
in.
requirement is when you
Yeah,
mention it. People are like, they don't go look it up. So that's
exactly.
what I did. I figured we'd have at least one question like this, and the
Yeah.
answer is always to go back to source and what does the exact wording say,
Yeah.
and make sure whatever you're doing does that. And that's one of the reasons why I recommend to clients it's not really a great practice to have your distributor be your authorized representative because their job is selling product. An
Right.
authorized representative has a whole bunch of other responsibilities, and if they're compromised by their focus as sales, they're not going to necessarily do a great job of making sure you're compliant. They're going to make sure that they're selling.
Correct.
So
No. Yep.
it's a really good idea to have a very qualified authorized representative to look at these things like, well, how are you labeling this? Who is your importer? What kind of agreement do you have with them? How are you identifying who the importer is?
Hmm.
And if you can answer those questions and the authorized rep says, yes, this is okay, that's going to work. But this is also the regulation for Europe.
Yep.
We don't know what individual member states are going to say.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
So each member state could put their own twist on this, just like the Germans historically said it must be a leaflet.
Yeah.
So others were saying, this is okay to have electronic documentation, and the Germans said no. Eventually, they changed the position, but this is an issue that could very easily go through a few rounds of debating once it's implemented and we see how different companies are implementing it. But the
So,
intent of the law is we want to identify who's the importer here,
importer.
so we have somebody to contact and
Yeah.
who is the economic operator that is registered for that product, and double checking you're doing all the things you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just
Totally.
having your DHL friend look at your paperwork is not what this is all about.
I agree.
Before
I totally agree. So
before
yeah.
I put Ginger back in the gallery, I want to thank you for that. And you apologize for like redirecting us. I'm going to say instead, that's what this is. This isn't Friday's here with us.
Yeah.
This isn't a webinar. It's a conversation where we get together and
Oh
share
yeah.
ideas. So
Yeah. No,
exactly
but
right.
Rob is such an expert. I just want to, and then there's the crabby Scottish ginger that goes, that's not what it's. Sorry, just going through. I'm
Yeah.
doing a lot of auditing for clients and trying
Yeah.
to internal auditing right now this
And
past
you got to
month
go
and a
back
half.
to what it says every time to make
I
sure.
I do, just to be sure. I'm like,
Yeah.
you're not out of compliance with the regs or the standard, but you handcuffed yourself in your quality manual.
Yeah, if you say this is how it shall be done, then that's how it shall be done.
Yep.
Much
Thank you,
better to
Ginger.
work that out with your importer ahead of time in writing as part of an agreement, and make sure you both agree. I'm going to go on to the next slide here, and if anybody has any other questions, please interrupt. So this particular section is about what new procedures will you need, and there isn't a specific requirement in there like there is in ISO 1345 to say you shall have a procedure for economic operators, but you do need to control that process and document that process for how you're going to communicate with your authorized representatives, importers, distributors, and also the issue that's come up lately is how are you going to communicate with your notified bodies regarding market surveillance. And I keep on trying to point out to people the requirement for market surveillance is not something that companies do. The requirement for market surveillance is something the notified bodies and competent authorities are doing. And we have to communicate with them and share that information with them. But that requirement is down here in the vigilance section. So vigilance, Article 87, and field safety corrective actions, Article 89. That's where those requirements are, or trend reporting, or updating informations in a periodic safety update report in Unimed. Those are where the information, that's how we communicate it. But people are saying, but it says we need to do something for market surveillance. We need to have that. So you may want to think about how you're wording your economic operator procedure, if you have one, to how you're going to communicate with your notified body in there as well, even though they're not actually what I was originally thinking of when I started writing an economic operator procedure. So we may be doing version 2 of our economic operator next week. We're already starting on a draft of it. So we haven't even gotten to the transition deadline, and we're already making revisions to our procedures based on feedback from companies that are being audited by notified bodies and feedback we're hearing from different discussions. So that's an important thing you need to consider is how are you going to document communication with those economic operators, and how are you going to communicate with your notified body would be a good thing to put in that same procedure. You might also put in there how you're going to communicate notification of significant changes. It might be in that document, it might be in some other document, but you need to document how that communication channel works. The vigilance procedure, there are new regulations or new articles that are specific to vigilance. And the process is going to change quite a bit as UTMEG comes on board. Trend reporting is something that you're going to have to be doing, and there's a separate regulation for that. That could be part of your vigilance procedure, but it could be part of post-market surveillance. Field safety corrective action usually is part of somebody's recall or advisory notice procedure, but I've also seen it under vigilance. Your technical file procedure, I've seen companies that don't even have a technical file procedure. They say in design controls that you create a technical file according to the MDD. And if you change that to create a technical file in accordance with the MDR, that's probably not going to fly with a notified body. And if I were an auditor, I would be looking at, well, is there any evidence of the company not compliant with the MDR? If everything that I see is compliant with the MDR and the procedure says write technical documentation in accordance with the MDR, it's hard to say that they're not in compliance. It may not be what I'd like, but if I can't find any evidence of nonconformity, is it really a problem? But most companies are going to have nonconformities. They're going to have things that they're missing. And so then you say, well, your procedure wasn't adequate. You didn't spell out the requirements. You're going to have controlled forms, such as you're going to want a GSPR checklist rather than an essential requirements checklist, because all of Annex 1 changed and all those requirements have changed. Some minor wording, some major, some completely new requirements. A few are identical to what they were before. But certainly the general requirements have all changed to one extent or another. Post-market surveillance, that's probably the biggest change fundamentally in the EU requirements for quality systems. The US FDA has very little requirements in the way of post-market surveillance, and the EU has gone the opposite direction to now they have a whole new section of your technical documentation that has to be prepared for post-market surveillance, and it has to be a living set of documents that is maintained. So there's maintenance that has to be done on a schedule based on the classification of the device and the risk and how old the device is. So brand new devices should get updated more frequently than devices that are legacy products that have been on the market a long time. Your clinical evaluation procedure, a lot of people are still using the MedDev document as their primary guidance for how to write a clinical evaluation. Some companies have procedures for a clinical evaluation procedure, but now you have Article 61, you have Annex 14, Part A, and you also are going to have MDCG guidance documents that are applicable as well. So almost all of these have some kind of MDCG guidance document that's been created or is in draft that you have to consider. And one of my clients was looking at a guidance document from the MDCG, and I'm like, but that's a guidance document for the notified body that's going to review and write a report, not for you. So yes, it's helpful to you to know what they're going to grade you on, but that's not your template, that's their template. So just some education and reading who the documents are for is key. And then last but not least, along with post-market surveillance, they've increased the requirement for clinical investigations. They're expecting more clinical studies for products. They're expecting, if you're not doing a clinical study that's pre-market, you're doing a post-market clinical follow-up study. It's hard to justify out of that, whereas before almost everybody was justifying out of doing post-market studies. Now you have a very large number of articles specific to clinical investigations. You have an updated international standard on how to do clinical investigations. You have a new one for IVD products that's going to take effect for the IVD companies out there. So you've got a lot of changes in clinical investigations, and I know a lot of U.S. companies out there, because they're focused on the U.S. market. They may not even have a clinical investigation procedure. They may not have any of the forms that you would typically expect to keep that system running smoothly, and the systems in place just don't exist for them. So you want to look very closely at clinical investigations as something you might need. Do you need it on May 26th? Only if you're doing a clinical study on May 26th. So if you're not doing a study yet, you don't need the procedure yet, but it's something you're going to need to put in place. And these are the things that notified body is going to be looking for. And it's hard to say, when I need it without knowing when you're going to do the investigation. This is the technical documentation. So this is what most people look at as, this is the regulatory person in my company. They're creating technical documentation. They're preparing it. They're submitting it to the notified body, or they're submitting it to an authorized representative or an importer. And so what am I going to have to update? Number one, sort of, if I were an auditor and I'm coming into your company and I'm seeing, are you compliant with the MDR? I'm going to do a sampling. I can't look at your 38 binders of technical documentation and read it all in an audit. I'm going to cherry pick documents that I know need to be updated and will be very quick and easy for me to verify it's been updated. And then in the areas where I know you probably had to do a lot of verification, validation to new standards, I'm going to know those are areas of emerging concerns or updates and activities. So I'm going to cherry pick those as, let's look at these to really challenge the system. So I'm going to start out with the GSPR checklist. If you still have an MDD checklist for the essential requirements, I'm going to give you a nonconformity. Now, if you didn't change the name from essential requirements checklist to GSPR, but all the requirements are it's the new requirements in the new Annex 1, I'm not going to nitpick and write you a finding because you didn't change the title of the document. There will be some auditors that will, but I'm not one of them. I don't write up nonconformities for titles either. You can call it what you want, but you do need to show that you're meeting all those requirements in the MDR, and that's what I'll look for. Annex 2, you're required to have a technical file. The technical file is now defined in Annex 2. Some people are still using the MB Med guidance document. Some people are using the GHTF guidance document. Some people have physical binders for everything. Some people have virtual, but they encourage you to use an index. Just like the FDA requires you to have a DMR, they encourage you to use a DMR index. They're very similar. The technical file requirements are mandated now. The DMR requirements are not for the FDA. So one simple way to make your life easier is to have a technical file index that also does double duty as a DMR index. So for those of you that have not written a procedure for your DMR, this is an opportunity to improve your FDA documentation as well and have it meet both requirements. If you have a DMR procedure, but you don't have a technical file procedure, you might just keep that procedure, revise and update it, and say, here's what the requirements are, and it's going to be both requirements. Can you maintain two totally separate systems? Yes. Why would you want to? I don't know. It's more work. If you're a consultant and your goal is to maximize your client's billable hours, that's one way to go. But I try to keep things as simple as possible. So indexes look like a table of contents. They're really easy for auditors to review. They're very easy to update. They're easy to send to a notified body as notification of significant changes. You can just redline the document. It's only a few pages. So use index, have them be double duty, and update them to the new requirements in Annex 2. For Annex 3, that's the post-market surveillance stuff that's totally new. That's the big change that they've had in your technical documentation. If you can't find a post-market surveillance procedure out there that is free, you didn't look very hard. Because there are so many post-market surveillance procedures, forms, templates out there right now. People are complaining that I didn't create a separate template for every single requirement there is. And I'm like, there are so many free ones out there. Just go back to the original requirement, make sure whatever free template you downloaded meets those requirements, tweak it to what you need internally, but you're going to need a post-market surveillance procedure, and that's what should guide what's going to be in that documentation. And you can include that as the part of your technical file index. And then the last requirement, Annex 4, Declaration of Conformity. This is one where Ginger would go back and say, this is what the regulation says, but we can fight this all day long, but ultimately there are two people that are going to decide what has to be in your declaration of conformity. If you have a notified body, they're going to determine what you have to have on your declaration of conformity, and you're not going to be able to argue with them because they're the one that issue your CE certificate, and their name is on that declaration as well. If you don't have a notified body, then you're going to do what your authorized representative does. If you don't have an authorized representative and you don't have a notified body, that means you're a class 1 device that's already in Europe as a company. And so then you're going to have to do what the member state tells you to do. But what I'm seeing out there is the notified bodies are already requiring more than what's in the regulation. So before, the issue was we didn't have documented requirements. Now the issue is that they're going above and beyond what's in the MDR. And a good example of that is the original drafts of the regulation said that you had to indicate what your harmonized standards were and the common specifications. And the final version that was released just says the common specification, but all the notified bodies that I've seen are asking for the harmonized standards as well, because they need that information. So why not have it in the Declaration of Conformity? And that can make a very long document if you've got a lot of standards that apply, or a lot of products.
I'm going to interject here, two things. One is I'm wearing the shirt you sent me, Pro Napper. I appreciate it.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
And second, I with the deluge of information you have to share, I'm reminded that, I could do my own taxes.
Yep.
But I have a tax accountant because all he does is get in the weeds of, that's a deduction, and did you know this, and did you know that? So for those of you watching at home, taking furious notes about these things that you're going to need to remember to do, you might choose to hire someone like Rob. This is what he does.
We actually have a couple of clients that are doing that right now. They need more representation in regulatory affairs. They're trying to decide how do we do that. And I think that it's really hard for anybody that doesn't have this as their only job responsibility, keep up to date on the regulations. It's hard to do. So if that isn't your only job responsibility, you probably shouldn't be the um, trying to do all
The
this
best use of
yourself.
your time.
Yeah, just like unless you do taxes all the time, you probably are not going to keep up to date in your tax law.
Right.
But at the same time, a lot of this work, like filling in your GSPR checklist, is mind-numbingly tedious, and you should not be paying $300, $400 an hour. If you're paying $100 an hour, you're probably overpaying to fill in that checklist. Have somebody audit it, have somebody check it that's qualified, but don't have them fill it in. They
Mhm,
don't enjoy it any more than you do.
mhm.
Have somebody else that's a lower pay rate do that. So right now in the US, we have made
Can you
a
refer those people? Can you refer those much lower? Or do you have anyone that on your team that is so junior that we can call you and you could throw it to a $50 an hour person?
yeah, so that's actually what I was going to say. What we have done in the US is we've switched from you used to learn on the job to now you go off and get a graduate degree in regulatory affairs. But those graduate degree students need training on the job in order to be competent. So they get a fancy degree, but they know nothing. So they need internships. Guess what you have interns do? And interns don't make 50 bucks an hour. So I actually have two clients that need the exact same thing on not similar products, but they need the similar documentation. They need technical files, and they're both electromedical devices with software. And one is sterile, one's not, but they clearly need the same kind of technical documentation filled in.
Mhm.
And so one of the clients that was in San Jose, one was located in New York, and they were like, we need help. And I was like, well, you're already engaging us, we're helping you, but what you need to do this work here is not high paid regulatory consultants. What you need is an intern to do some of this. Oh, do you know of somebody? Like, I have dozens of them contacting me every single week saying, can you hire me? And I have a limit to how many people I can hire and
Manage,
manage
right,
myself.
right.
But if you need a full-time intern, you have a whole bunch of technical files that need updating, hire an intern. They're screaming for work. And even though they might be from India and you might normally not be able to hire them as a full-time employee because you don't want to sponsor a visa. As a student, they are on an F1 visa, or they're on an extension program like an OPT program,
You know what would be a
or
gift? If you
or
took
they might
it,
be a US citizen and they might be able to work for you as a full-time employee eventually. But there are a lot of interns out there in graduate programs and regulatory affairs at all kinds of universities. Northeastern has a really long program where they have a requirement for a co-op to get your degree. So Northeastern would be the first place I'd look. They're in Boston area. Next place I would look is probably GW University. We have one that's just finishing up a year and a half with us, or a year with us. So that's another place. We just hired one for these two clients I talk about. They're splitting their time. One gets the first half of the week, the other one gets the second half of the week. They're out of San Jose University. Um, there are other programs all over the country. There's one out in Indiana that I visited that was fantastic. So there's a lot of programs out there. They're constantly developing new ones. Kellogg has a great program that's tied in tight with RAPS. So hire an intern, and if you
Robert,
want, we can recommend somebody.
well, I was gonna say, it would be a real gift if you chose to invest the time in making somewhat of a portal on your site where interns could self-identify and you could refer people to that page.
That's a cool idea.
Hmm, I know a guy who could help you. Ginger writes, I agree with Rob. I always submit to a notified body as a draft. And then the notified body will tell you if they like it, but there are no harmonized standards under MDR yet. And
That
she also
that's
agrees
great.
we'll be required to list other directives, just not standards.
No, but I've already been through several MDR reviews, and they're saying you need to add these standards. You need to list the standards. Even if they're not harmonized, you need to list the standards, and they want the most current version listed. So it's not okay to just list ISO 10993-1. You need to list what version of it, and those are things that a regulatory person wouldn't think twice about, but companies are getting tripped on left and right.
Go ahead and read for the group what Divya has to contribute.
Gotta move my screen here. So soda versions may not be the latest version yet.
That's Ginger.
Okay. Oh, the one up
that.
above that?
Yes, please.
I truly agree that the AR should be separated from distributor. However, for foreign manufacturer, it becomes costly to manage. Can the distributor take the responsibility of hiring AR before selling and managing compliance so that there's a single point of contact to manage all EU activities and oversee the AR role as well? So I've never seen that suggested before, but the contract between the AR and the manufacturer has to be that relationship. Your distributor isn't the one that's hiring the AR. They might introduce you. I suppose it might be possible for them to be an intermediary and be the point of contact, but the contract is between the authorized representative and the company. And um, when you say costly to manage, I mean, yes, they're all charging probably $3,000 and up for the contract on an annual basis. But you have a lot of new requirements in there. One of them is liability insurance. The manufacturer is required to indemnify the authorized representative, and they have to be listed on that liability insurance, and you have to be able to show that. So I have seen one notified body already ask for proof that you have liability insurance and wanted to see that the economic operators are listed on it. So I don't see how your distributor, most of the people want to use the distributor because the distributor's not charging them any money for the AR. If the distributor's reading the MDR carefully, they should be saying politely, you know, I don't think I really want to be your AR anymore. That would be my position, and I know the law. I think the people that are saying yes are seeing dollar signs, and they want to do that job, but the responsibilities for the AR are significant. And if you're hiring somebody that's a distributor to do the job of an AR, they really need to know what they're doing. And they're going to have a person identified as the person with regulatory responsibility, and they're going to have to be listed in UDAMED as the point of contact. And the competent authorities and the notified bodies are going to visit. They are going to check you out and make sure you have the systems in place. They're going to want to see records that you have been reviewing the technical documentation. And I don't know too many distributors that get full access to those technical files. In fact, I have a client where their distributor became their competitor because the distributor copied their product. So do you really want to give them all your technical documentation? Amerigo is not going to go into competition with you, but your distributor might. So be really careful about your distributors being your AR. I think it's a bad policy. I'd like to know if the supplier already has ISO 13485 and later they decide to become a manufacturer themselves. Would they need any further ISO audits and certification for the capability of a manufacturer?
That's from Gayatri. Go ahead.
So every certificate you get, whether it's a CE certificate or a quality system certificate, has a scope in it. So it's possible that you could have a supplier, which is a contract manufacturer or component supplier, that has the scope that they could also be your manufacturer. You just might not be using them for that today. But they could also have scope that just says that we mold plastic pieces. It might be ISO 13485, but if it just says they mold plastic pieces and now you want them to do assembly and final test, it's outside the scope of their certificate. So it depends on the scope of their certificate, but you don't have to tell them what you're looking for. You could just ask for a copy of their certificate and read it yourself. And if it follows the scope that you need, then you know they're okay. If it doesn't, then you should be coming up with a plan for when they're going to have that audit and when they're going to be compliant. You don't want to jump the gun on it. But I think Ginger mentioned before, just because most people do get ISO 13485 certified, Europe doesn't require ISO 13485 certification. They require that you're compliant with, I think it's Article 10, and they list all the quality system requirements. And one of them isn't ISO 13485 certification. That's just the easiest way to demonstrate it.
We're almost at the top of the hour. For those of you who have to drop off, we are recording. I do have a channel where I have all of our events archived, and you can hit me if you don't know how to reach that.
I think we already covered economic operators. For those of you that don't know what the person with regulatory responsibility is, there's a requirement in Article 15, and it actually spells out what your qualifications should be. And so if you don't have a lot of years, you need a degree. If you have at least 4 years, that could be, but it has to be relevant to regulatory affairs or quality management systems, not for, I worked in the supply chain. So just working in a medical device company doesn't necessarily meet the requirement. It has to be quality system or regulatory affairs um, and medical devices combined in order to be the right kind of experience. So we actually have a client that is going to meet this requirement, and he doesn't have a 4-year degree, but he has all the experience, and he has been his title has been Director of Regulatory Affairs and Quality Assurance, and he's been CE marking the device for more than 4 years, so he's in great shape. But we have another client where not one person in the company has had that title before, um, and the one person that has the quality assurance hasn't had the title that long and doesn't feel comfortable having the responsibility for this. So you may find yourself in a situation where you either need to hire somebody new, or the next line after the ones that I've copied here talk about micro companies. So if you have a very small company that meets the European regs for a micro company, then you might be able to use a consultant on the outside. But they have this interesting wording in there that you have to be continuously available. So I'm sure somebody's got a legal interpretation out there for continuously available, but I'm assuming it means Rob needs to have his cell phone on 24/7. um, so hopefully the systems we have in place will be good enough. But I haven't taken on that role for any of our clients yet. But I'm sure people will be asking as the MDR comes into force, can you serve this role, because we got a notified body finding saying we don't comply and we need 6 more months before I meet the requirements. So could you do it for us in the interim? So I'm sure those kinds of requests will come along, but uh, it's something you should be thinking about when you write your job descriptions. Do they meet these requirements? And you may have to update some job descriptions. And you may have to upgrade some people in your company. Maybe they need training. Maybe they need a degree. Maybe they just need more experience.
I just shared the link for the archives and where this replay will be hosted. Please continue.
Thank you. I think we're reaching the end of my slides here. I had UDI. So the big item that I had here was they're different from the FDA. So in the beginning, it looked like they were going to try to mirror what the FDA was doing very, very closely. But over time, they've added on a lot of their own idiosyncrasies that make it slightly different from the FDA's requirements. How they define what is a DI and what would fall under the PI is slightly different for the two. So it might be the same for your company. It might not be. And now they've got 10 MDCG guidance documents that you have to read through and apply for your UDI process. And another difference is that when you're going for a 510K clearance, you would have a placeholder and say, this is where I'm going to put my UDI. Once the UDIMED system is set up and completely functional, you're going to actually have to have the UDI, upload your label, upload a lot of your documentation before you can even go through the review process. So that means you need your UDIs and your DIs all assigned before they can review your application. If you don't have that, they won't be able to start the process. So in Europe, you got to have your UDI before you go through the review process. In the US, it can be after the review process or in parallel with. So those are some minor differences, but they might make a difference for a company, particularly if you have a large number of parts, like if you have accessories like sutures, or if you have probes or electrodes or something that have a lot of different SKUs in terms of length and size, those part numbers can add up pretty quick. All the configurations and variants you have might add up to a lot of UDI numbers, and you have to maintain that system. And it might mean very quickly, Richard Houlihan is your friend, and maybe you need an outside consultant helping you just with UDI.
I do have folks over at Wreak. You might remember Gary Singer.
Yeah, I recommend them a lot.
Entire system that is all about UDI. So
yeah,
when it comes to unique device identification, yeah, I definitely know a guy and a gal. So,
and I would say, I think what they told me was something along the lines of 80–90% of the small companies out there are using them.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So hit me if you need that reference.
If you need help with UDIMED, I put the link specifically for the replay for Richard's talk. I
Okay.
put his website at the bottom in the logo,
Yeah.
but if you look at what the status is today, the only part of the system that you can actually use right now is the actor registration. So basically you get a serial number. That's it. So all these other things are not live yet. Coming in
Mhm.
September, we'll see. Nothing has been on schedule yet, so why should that be? But they're saying right now that 5 months from now, we will have UDI, device registration, and notified bodies and certificates will be there. We'll see. I haven't had a notified body ever give me a certificate on time, so why would they have the certificate system that's live for everybody else up and running, working correctly? I don't know. But the one I have in green is the one that you can access right now. So the approach we're taking is we've got a procedure for the UDIMED system that we created, and right now that's what's there, but we're going to add as each part comes into effect and they implement more MDCG guidance documents, we'll keep on doing revisions. So if you're thinking about should I buy procedures from Medical Device Academy, we've had the policy of free updates to everybody. So once you bought the procedure, you're on a subscription list and you get automatic updates of all the revised procedures. So when version 2 and 3 come out later, you'll get those updates. You don't have to buy again. So it's not a
Let
time
me have
consuming.
you repeat that. So this is something that you sell.
Yep. We sell a complete set of procedures for Europe, Canada, and US. We offer it as a turnkey system, or you can buy a la carte. So if you wanted to buy our UDIMED procedure, if you pay the $299 for that procedure, you would get the version that we have today, which is only going to cover actor registration. By September, we're going to have also UDI registration and notified body certificates in there as well. And then as the other requirements come into effect
You'll
with
be sending
UDIMED,
those out for free,
yep, if you have bought the initial version.
right?
So whenever you buy it, you get all the updates for free.
Mhm.
All the way we do it is just a subscription, an email subscription. So we say, hey, by the way, we updated our procedure. Here's the new version.
So if I
We
were to
send it
buy
out as a
it,
Word version.
if I were to buy it later, and I had 3 of the pieces, would it be more than $299?
Nope. It's always, we've had it $299 since we started offering procedures. We haven't changed our pricing.
Okay.
And
Moving on.
for those of you that are on this channel watching this, if you're going to buy more than 2, so when you buy your third one, ask for a discount. I give you a 20% discount. So if you tell me by email, hey, Rob, I want to buy these 3 procedures, I'll send you an invoice via PayPal for those. And once you pay, you'll get them in your inbox, and we'll do the registration for the email updates manually. If you purchase all 3 separately, or you purchased 2 before and now you're going to buy your third one, just shoot me an email reminder and I'll give you a refund of the 20% for the 3 procedures. And just remind me if I forget. I have one client, I'm like, oh yeah, they bought other procedures, they're due a refund. They're like, oh, I didn't know, thank you. So remember that. It's just volume discount. Because and if you buy 3-4 procedures now and then say, hey, we want to buy your whole package of all your procedures, we credit you for what you already paid.
Luke half the time doesn't want to come on camera because he's already into his second beer. You want to read his comment there?
Sure. Just a remark, it's not only a change in regulations, but also the notified bodies became more strict. All the more lenient notified bodies are weeded out. The current notified bodies were audited heavily before achieving their MDR accreditation. That is correct. They went from having their competent authority that was in their country auditing them, the same person every year, year after year, to having joint inspections by multiple competent authorities. And I don't think they picked the friendly competent authority to do the joint inspection with. I think in most cases they said, well, if you're going to come audit us, we're going to audit you, and we're going to be just as painful. So they definitely weeded out a lot. They There are some notified bodies out there. So I actually have done training of the notified bodies as well. So BSI, I was a trainer internally as well as externally. I've also done it for DECRA, and a Turkish notified body asked me to train their whole entire team. So people, you had like 5 or 6 different Turkish notified bodies at one point. I don't think they have that many now. But when you look at a notified body, they're not all created equal just because they're from the same country. The particular notified body I trained, they were all class 3 and class 2B devices. They were doing IVD products. They were doing implants. They had 25 really strong people, and they actually paid to have professional translation firm come in and translate everything. Every question they had was translated from Turkish into English, and all my responses were translated from English into Turkish, real time, by the same kind of people that work at the UN. And they recorded everything. And they actually had 3 professional translators in the room that were responsible for translating the MDR from English into Turkish.
Which
So
brings
they
us
were
to your
asking,
last slide on translations.
yeah. So I'm not saying I'm an expert in translation by any means, but that's what some of these notified bodies have gone through. So they really know their stuff. They were arguing over nuances of a specific word and identifying errors in the MDR, in like, this was not originally translated correctly. This is what the intent was. And I was emailing different experts that I knew in Europe, like Gert Boss and Eric Volbrick, and saying, what is your interpretation of this? Oh, this is what we meant when we were helping writing it.
Mhm. We invested an hour talking about MDR and translations last week. It's on the archive with
Yeah, that's an
Michelle
awesome
and
session. I
Peter.
really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was a really good one. Before we wrap soon, I just want to give a shout out to my friend Kim Young, who's on the call. Hey, Kim. And to say hi to Nellie Bushman. She's our newest MDG premium member. We didn't get a chance to get her on, but perhaps next week.
Thank you, everybody, for showing up this week.
We have some openings in the next month. We had a cancellation for one of my speakers. So if there are topics or you yourself want to be a presenter, let me know. Rob, give us a summary of, you've given us 10. What are the things, if you remember nothing else about this call?
I think the most valuable money that you could spend right now would be to have somebody that really knows their stuff on the MDR do an audit to the MDR. And whether it's virtual, a remote audit, or on site, doesn't really matter because everybody's doing things on Zoom now. But I would definitely, before a notified body's knocking on your door or your authorized representative is asking for documentation that they need to review before they can take care of your annual registration issues, you really should be getting an audit of this stuff. Look at it as an opportunity to catch things before them. You want the auditor to do a really good job to catch things before the notified body does. You want them to give you a tough audit, not a piece of paper that meets the requirements.
Do you have the capacity to take on all that business?
If everybody on your line right now, the 21, say yes, no. but
Well, Michelle
I'm
just
sure that
raised her
some of the
hand
people
and-
on the line, like Michelle, could do the audit. So yes, we are doing audits. We actually wrote a procedure on how to do it. We have a video on how to do it. And we have 4 qualified lead auditors that can do it. And we have 2 subcontractors
Oops.
that are qualified as well.
That's the wrong Michelle.
Yeah, you're not Michelle.
No, I don't know how that happened. She raised her hand and then she put her hand down. And I was trying to promote her.
clicked.
Well, now I'm just, anyhow, she couldn't find the link and then Andre sent her the link. So I had 2 Andres and Andre just. Oh,
You
look
got
at
stuck
that.
with the real one. You got stuck with
And
the
you
real
might have
one.
made a special sign for it, MDR and MDG.
That was for Rob. That was for Rob. Yep.
Okay. I don't think Michelle or I are hurting for work, but I would definitely recommend Michelle to do any MDR audits as well.
But Rob, my question for you was, do you think that the EC Commission is going to extend the deadline again? I'm getting this question all the time. I was wondering what your opinion was.
No. They until the 11th hour when they actually extended it, they swore they weren't going to extend it last time. So I don't see any reason why they're going to extend it, but we were wrong last time. Why not be wrong again?
Last time we had a global pandemic, that was a pretty good excuse to hide behind.
Yep.
That
was the excuse they used.
I think it would be losing to do it again.
It would be political suicide for a few of those people.
Well, Andre, I made you come on the camera, say something.
Thanks, Rob. It was very helpful. I have a client that's pushing us not to put him through for MDR. So he's sticking with the MDD right now, but I'm going to show him this video. It'll be very helpful.
That doesn't make any sense.
We have 2 clients that are screaming and kicking to stay under the MDD and try to get their certificate renewed, or one of them renewed and one issued under the MDD. So there are rare situations where it makes sense.
Only if you plan on being out of business in 5 years.
Well, it's a temporary solution is all it is.
That's what it is.
One company if they had a certificate, it expired. They weren't watching their certificate expirations, like I had said.
Birthdays,
So
anniversary, and expiration.
yeah, so if the company has their certificate expire, they're looking at, we need to renew. Renewing your MDD certificate, that the only reason why it's no good is because it expired, is probably a small hurdle. Converting all your documentation and going through an MDR certification audit is a bigger hurdle, and the auditing process is going to take longer because there's more for them to look at. So that is a rare situation where, if you're going to decide which one to do and you need to do it now because you can't sell right now, going in for the MDD is a viable argument that you can make, and it makes logical sense. But that does not mean they aren't going to upgrade to the MDR in the next 18 months. They're not waiting until their certificate expires twice. They're not that stupid. You know, they had once they made a mistake. Twice, they're going to get fired. So whoever's in charge of that will watch those certificates from now on very, very closely, and they're not going to let it expire. They're going to proactively get the MDR certificate upgraded as soon as they possibly can while this MDD certificate is still in effect. The other client, they had certain requirements that they knew they couldn't meet under the MDR, because it would require additional technical documentation, particularly under post-market surveillance and clinical evaluation, they couldn't comply with. And they needed to do it in a very short amount of time. There was a notified body that does not have MDR designation yet, that says they can get them a certificate. So I recommended strongly, don't do this. They did it anyway because the notified body said, we're going to get designated, don't worry, and we will get this done by May 26th. It's a very long list of nonconformities that they're facing right now, or deficiencies that need to be addressed by May 26th. The invoices we're sending them and the amount of hours we're putting into this to try to help them to hit that deadline are not pretty. I would not want to be signing those checks myself. So yeah, you can do it, but they're doing it against the recommendation of somebody that's been down this road before. And every single thing that we've said is going to happen. I mean, I need a t-shirt for them that says, I told you so.
Yeah, but Rob, see, with a certificate that expiring maybe in a year and a half or 2 years, you know, customer says, well, I don't have to worry about this right now. And that's the negative, you know.
Yep. But it takes honestly a good 6 months to address deficiencies in your initial round of review. And your initial round of review is going to take 6 months. So if they're telling me our certificate expires in 18 months, they have 6 months to have their audit start. And so if they're saying we don't have to worry about it, it's just a matter of time before the carnage hits.
Yeah.
I can't think of a more pleasant note on which to conclude this.
But it's real. People are literally losing their jobs and going out of business because of this. If you half your sales are in Europe and all of a sudden you can't sell, what are you going to do?
Or you're out.
Yeah.
Michelle, I remember your answer to that.
Basel Acra says, gonna open a restaurant, might as well open a restaurant. Get out of the notified body business, get out of the medical device business and open a restaurant.
And he picked really ideal timing to switch from I'm working for a notified body to I'm a consultant.
Right.
Richard, same story. I mean, people are going to have to spend a lot of money to be compliant with this. You know, this is not pleasant for anybody. I call it the Frankenstein regulation, and nobody's arguing.
I spoke with a friend who left industry and came back. I just spoke with him last week, and he joined a notified body in a sales and development capacity. And I said, you know, you guys must not be hurting for business. I mean, people are clamoring to find a notified body at all. And he said that his constraint was having enough talent in the building to field the demand.
Oh, it
So I'm
would,
like, how does that even, sorry, what?
I personally think it would suck right now to work in sales and marketing for a notified body because the people who are actually doing the work, so you go and kill it, you drag it home, you have to give a quote, and then the quote you give, it's atrocious. And you have to tell the client that we can't start for a year. A year.
A great way to give an analogy to people that they could understand. It's sort of like a bus load of people were just dropped off at your car dealership. You're the only sales guy on the lot and you have no cars to sell. And all of them have suitcases of cash. Do you want to be that sales guy?
Well, does he get his commission now?
You get the commission after you've sold a car. You don't have any cars to sell. They get cash. They're here. They don't have a ride home. You're the only sales guy.
Well, I think
Your hands
they
are
should
tied.
just leave the bundles of cash here at the dealership, and when the cars come in, I'll.
Well, that's sort of like the notified body that hasn't been designated yet saying, we promise we're going to get designated. Please send cash.
Right.
All up front, please.
You want to go ahead and read Divya's comment?
One company in India is in the process of renewing the MDD certificate with UL. Should they wait until the certificate is renewed, as the certificate will expire in a month? Then do
I
the
think they have a
MDR
choice.
transition? What is the best possible way?
I don't think they have a choice but to wait. You can't just renew like that, right?
Well, I don't think it would be possible to answer all the deficiencies that UL should be giving you in an MDD audit in the next 30 days or 33
Right.
days.
Right.
So I wouldn't recommend doing the MDR transition in the next month. I would try to just renew the MDD certificate, and I would ask for a quote and schedule a date for the MDR transition sometime in the next 18 months.
So is
That's
it?
how I would do it.
So I guess I was thinking about it the wrong way. Is it easy for me to write my notified body and say, can I re-up my MDD as it is now? I've changed nothing, and be like, okay, and so then I have more time.
If I haven't started the process already, I think renewing an existing certificate's easier than getting a new MDR
My
certificate.
question is, does it take less than a month to renew a certificate?
Yes.
Is it just like, oh,
theory.
sure, I'll just sign on that? Is it like refilling my prescription? Sure, take the same thing.
It's not exactly the same as renewing your prescription on a med, but it's easier, has fewer hurdles. They have an established process. They have established regulations. You know, you were compliant already.
Mhm.
You should still be compliant. So it's maintenance issues. Whereas when you look at the MDR, it's a whole set of regs you've never been audited to. And if you think you're going to have no findings, you're crazy. I don't think there's a consultant out there that would promise their client, I promise you won't get any findings. Who wants to give that kind of guarantee?
Mhm.
So much of it is interpreted by an auditor and not always fairly or correctly. Auditors make mistakes too.
Okay, well, thank you, Andre, and thank you, Michelle. Rob, a final question from me is about goatees.
Oh,
So, you know, I'm kind of a transient goatee wearer.
Yeah.
And I have, during this call, thought to myself, take your hand away from your face, and I can't help but pull on it.
yeah.
Is this something, because you haven't done it?
I do it all the time.
Is it because you were talking that you didn't, or?
I think I do it more when I'm thinking, and when I'm talking, I don't think I do it as much.
Mhm.
And so you were listening, and that's I would probably, if I'm just sitting there listening, I'd be either playing with something on my desk or yeah. But yeah, I think that's common.
Did you hear Elliot snoring halfway through your presentation?
I did not. He was
He-
very quiet.
Yeah, he found this material intolerably boring and just conked out as soon as he hit his little pillow.
So what does excite him? Is it marketing conversations
No, it's a laser pointer in my kitchen, and it is,
to die for?
no, it's more than that. We have a language. Go ahead, go see Mama. There is a look that he gives only me, because I'm the only one who will accommodate him. And it is very like, I need this, and I'm like, I'm doing something, and he will just be like, the eyes get
Gives you
as
the
wide as
stare.
they can go, and then he'll go like this.
Come
Like
on,
looking
let's
over
go.
to the.
Yeah.
And if I like look like I'm gonna, he'll start to run toward it. He needs to be accommodated. It's rather tiring. The problem is that he insists on playing this game. The word is very recognizable. If it's like he's outside and we don't know where he is, I go, game, and he comes running in the house. He barks with great excitement.
Mhm.
So if there's any attempt to be on a phone call, taking a virtual class because we're home, or sleeping, then I'm like, sorry, buddy. I mean, the mama said no, we
Yep.
can't play the game right now.
Yeah, the background noise from the pets. Everybody deals with that, and people with children have to deal with the kids are home and they're making noise, and that's just the virtual world we live in. If you don't have tolerance for pets and kids, maybe you shouldn't be on this planet.
Before I lose you again for a month or so, let me call you right after we hang up.
Sure.
Okay.
On Zoom or Slack or
I don't know.
old-fashioned technology?
Do you have an iPhone?
I don't. I have an Android phone.
I
I don't
heard
even
today
know
that
if
for the
your
first
phone
time
is
there are
allowed to
more
call
Android-
mine anymore.
I heard for the first time today that there are more Android users than iPhone users, which surprised me.
That's I thought was always the case.
Well, actually, I guess that does make sense, but it was I don't know, in the context I heard it, it sounded surprising. Anyhow, our call is concluded, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, everybody.